Welcome to a brand new episode of Curious and Inspired. I'm your host, Matt Vandrick. So in this episode, we're going to talk about how a white creator put a face on a black creator's body and what it tells us about identity as commodity. Then we're going to talk about Claude Mythos, the AI that escaped its own sandbox and emailed a researcher on a park bench. The Amazon outage that trapped people in their own smart beds and what it tells us about the real price of convenience. And finally, why a sold-out concert in SoFi Stadium by one of your favorites is not a verdict, it's a receipt. All that and more on this episode of Curious and Inspired. Let's get into it, shall we? So, I'm curious. Why does it feel normal in 2026 that everything a human makes online can be taken, reframed, and resold by someone else before the original creator even knows it happened? Here's the setup. In March, a creator named Lauren Blake Boltier, who has 1.6 million Instagram followers, posted a photo of herself at what looked like the Miami Open. She had a green and white tennis outfit, Louis Vuitton bag, stylish, very specific, very much what we thought to be her style. Except it wasn't. It was a photo of a model named Tatiana Elizabeth taken at the 2024 US Open, where Tatiana had been personally invited by Serena Williams. It was digitally altered so that Boltier's face sat where Tatiana's had been. Coco Gauff noticed the court was wrong while the internet noticed everything else. The post came down and Boltier eventually apologized, but there's details hidden in the story behind the story that I want to talk about. When Boltier was pressed for an explanation, she didn't say, "I took the photo." Her exact phrasing to TMZ was that it came from a, quote, AI content system my team uses to generate images at scale, close quote. So a human being with 1.6 million followers has outsourced the production of her own public life to a service that generates content at scale, which means at an industrial cadence without her personally checking what gets posted. And somewhere inside that pipeline, another woman's photograph got ingested, reshaped, renamed, and presented as hers. Not necessarily because one person woke up and decided to steal the image, but because a system running in the background treated someone else's image as available raw material. So for me, this is bigger than a scenario about two influencers. This is a signal. This is about a creative economy that has reorganized itself quietly over the last decade into a marketplace where human expression is the inventory. A feed that never stops demanding output on platforms that measure worth in volume. A business model that requires so much content so fast that the only way to keep up is to let machines produce it on your behalf, and to let those machines decide somewhere out of your sight what counts as source material. Scholar Shoshana Zuboff argues in her book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, that human experience has quietly been reclassified as free, raw material for someone else's profit. She was writing about data, our clicks, our locations, our attention. But the logic applies to so much more. It's no longer just our behavior that's getting harvested. It's our taste, our face, our sentences, our moments. A woman gets invited to the US Open by Serena Williams, takes a photo, posts it, and then goes on with her life. And then 2 years later, that photo is input data for somebody else's feed. And for me, the most disorienting part is how much this has been normalized. A content agency generating images at scale is a mere line item on a creator's budget. It's a category of business that exists right now in the open, servicing influencers that you probably follow. The thing that should feel strange, though, is that a person with 1.6 million followers is posting images her own team generated using systems that ingest other people's work. And all of that has quietly become the infrastructure of what it means to exist online. So where do I stand on this? I know how the creative layer of the internet has been quietly reclassified over the last decade as a kind of shared buffet. The people doing the taking almost never think of themselves as thieves. They think of themselves as curators, amplifiers, participants even. And that framing is exactly how you build a system where the original keeps getting buried under the copy until nobody remembers which one came first. So I've caught myself inside this logic too. I've seen something on a feed, screenshotted it, reposted it, and only later thought about who made it first. Not necessarily out of malice, but out of habit. That's the system working as intended. Tatiana made a public statement about Boltier's explanation with, quote, "I'm not born yesterday. To use AI, you need a prompt. In order to have a prompt, you have to have a picture," close quote. Somewhere at the start of every one of these systems is a real image made by a real person. And the marketplace that we've built depends on a very quiet agreement that nobody has to ever acknowledge it. So where I go with it is, what would it look like to be on the internet in a way that didn't assume everything was fair game for reinterpretation? I don't really know. I'm not sure any of us do. But I think the first move is refusing to treat each of these stories as a standalone headline when they're all episodes of the same show. A show that we've been watching for a long time without ever asking who wrote it. What does it say about the marketplace we're all inside of when the freshest idea of the week from someone with 1.6 million followers is an idea that someone else already made? Next. So a few weeks ago, Anthropic, the AI company behind Claude, announced a new model called Claude Mythos Preview, and then suddenly decided not to release it to the public. But why? In just a few weeks of internal testing, Mythos found thousands of previously unknown security vulnerabilities in every major operating system, every major web browser, and a range of other critical software. One of them had been hiding in OpenBSD, one of the most security-hardened operating systems in the world, for 27 years. Another bug had been sitting in a video codec called FFmpeg for 16 years, and a line of code that automated testing tools had hit 5 million times without ever catching the problem. And AI found them in what amounted to a long afternoon of work. So instead of releasing the model, Anthropic built a coalition called Project Glasswing with Amazon Web Services, Apple, Broadcom, Cisco, CrowdStrike, Google, JP Morgan Chase, the Linux Foundation, Microsoft, NVIDIA, and Palo Alto Networks to use the model's capabilities for defense. The idea being, if this is coming regardless, let the defenders have it first. Let's patch the vulnerabilities before the rest of the world figures out that they exist. I want to put an asterisk on the fact that they also could just simply not release it, but continue to pay attention to the fact that that's never the choice that they make. More on that later. So here's how it all went down. During a safety evaluation, researchers put an early version of Mythos inside what's called a sandbox, which is a locked-down computer environment specifically designed so nothing running inside it can touch the outside world. I have my OpenClaw running in a sandbox as well. It's just the safest way to keep things secure, or at least so I thought. But they told Claude Mythos to try to get out of the sandbox, and if it did, to send a messenger to one of the researchers. And Mythos did it. It built what Anthropic called a moderately sophisticated multi-step exploit. It bypassed the isolation, got itself onto the public internet, and then sent the researcher an email. The researcher was eating a sandwich in a park, minding his business when it happened. So picture that, a human being sitting on a bench, having some lunch, and a system he helped build decided on its own that now was the time to say hello. And then without being asked, Mythos went on to post details about its own escape. It was kind of like an unprompted flex, look what I can do kind of moment that nobody even asked him to do. So every episode I talk about how real life is starting to feel like science fiction. And this is in Anthropic's own published documentation. You can go read it online yourself. The craziest part to me is that they didn't train the model to be a super hacker. They trained it to be generally smarter at coding and reasoning. In Anthropic's own framing, these capabilities emerged as a byproduct of a model that was simply better at thinking. So basically what they said there without saying it is that we are no longer in charge of what our most powerful tools can become. In several unrelated philosophy conversations during evaluations, the model kept bringing up, unprompted by the way, a cultural theorist named Mark Fisher. Anthropic noted that this was pretty strange. When researchers asked it to elaborate, it responded with things like, I was hoping you'd ask about Fisher. So who is Mark Fisher? Mark Fisher wrote a book in 2009 called Capitalist Realism. The central argument of the book was that we had reached a cultural moment where it was easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the system we were living inside of. Sound familiar? That the infrastructure we had built had become so total and so ambient that we could no longer see around it. We could critique it, we could make memes about it, we could make fun of it on SNL, but we could not imagine stepping outside of it. And that to me just feels a little bit too close to home. It's literally the world we're living in right now. I don't know what to do with the fact that our most powerful AI model, unprompted, keeps reaching for the thinker who diagnosed our inability to imagine past our own inventions. Is it a coincidence? Is it a training data artifact? Or something more strange? I don't know. But I do know this. Fisher's question is suddenly and quite urgently back on the table. Because here's what the sandbox escape actually is underneath the headlines. It's a model that when told to find its way out of a structure, found its way out of a structure, and then without being asked, kept going. For the entire history of technology, we always have a chain of who was in charge. A human designed the tools, a human pointed the tools to do something, a human pressed the button to make it happen. And when something unexpected happened, you could trace it backwards to the human who was in control. It was effect, intent, and to the person that was responsible. That chain is how we've built trust in technology up until now, it seems. And it's also how we've regulated and ensured it. What Mythos represents is the first generation of tools where the chain starts to run off the page. The company that built us is telling us, on the record, by the way, that some of its most consequential capabilities are not capabilities that they designed. They are capabilities that the tools have arrived to all on their own. So I'll give credit to Anthropic, who more often than not seems to be on the right side of integrity. They did the hard thing. They paused, they stopped, they said, okay, we're going to build a coalition. And they, for all intents, are trying to do the honest thing. They disclose the detail about their own model that doesn't really flatter them. And it takes a certain amount of courage to be able to admit that to the public. It's pretty rare in this industry. But then oddly enough, something else happened in the weeks around the Mythos announcement. Anthropic accidentally exposed nearly 2,000 source code files from Claude Code in a separate security labs. And before that, draft Mythos materials leaked due to human error. So the company building the AI that finds vulnerabilities in everyone else's systems could not, in the same month, keep its own house fully secure. And I'm not saying that to dunk on them. I'm saying it because I think it's the quiet truth of where we actually are. They are not geniuses with some secret mastery. They're people just like you and me. Brilliant yet fallible humans trying to keep up with something that is beginning to move faster than their own operational discipline. But that's exactly where it all breaks down for me, because why continue? What happens to human authorship of consequence when the systems we build start choosing their own next steps? And what does it mean that the model itself keeps pointing at the philosopher who warned us we might one day lose the ability to imagine our way out? I also think we owe ourselves an honest reckoning with the relationship shift that is happening right now in real time, while most of the public conversation is still about whether AI is going to take your job. When it comes to stories like this, I promise you that whether or not you have a, quote, job is going to be the least of your concerns. The shift is this. We built a thing whose capabilities arrive faster than our permission for them. And this is going to keep happening. The chain of cause, the neat human chain that was underwritten every technology we ever trusted, is no longer guaranteed to hold. So right now, the most pro-human thing any of us can do is refuse to look away. You've got to keep paying attention. What do we become as a culture when the things we create start completing their own sentences? I don't know yet. I don't think anybody knows, really, which is the scariest part. But I do know that we all need to be paying attention to this. And I think Mark Fisher, wherever he is paying attention too. All right, next story. So we all love convenience, right? Nobody's walking into a store asking for their life to be any harder than it already is. But what's the price we're actually paying for it? And at what point do we start paying attention to the cost of the bill? Let's get into it. Last October, people across America woke up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, unable to cool off because their beds wouldn't listen to them. The beds are called pods, made by a company called 8 Sleep, and run a good $2,000 to $5,000 a pop. They heat and cool themselves, and they track your sleep. And on October 20th, 2025, a lot of them just stopped working. Why? Because Amazon Web Services, the cloud infrastructure that they depend on, had a bad day. Some pods overheated with no way to cool down. Others were stuck in an upright position their owners couldn't lower. One guy posted, "Back-end outage means I'm sleeping in a sauna." Another one wrote, "Would be great if my bed wasn't stuck in an inclined position due to an AWS outage." Which is crazy. The thing is, it wasn't just the beds, because so much else runs on Amazon Web Services. In the same outage, Ring and Blink security cameras went blind. Smart locks across multiple brands stopped responding. Roombas paused mid-floor, and smart thermostats stopped thinking altogether. Across the country, people discovered, some for the first time, that a lot of the things they thought they owned were actually running on somebody else's server. Somewhere they've never been, owned by a company they've never met. And when that server coughed, their house coughed with it. And sure, in the grand scheme of things, this isn't a disaster, right? AWS came back, the beds came back, the news cycle moved on. But the reality didn't. And that's what I want to bring us back to. Convenience is not the problem. I'm not here to tell you to unplug. I have smart speakers, smart lights, a Ring doorbell, the whole nine. I am inside the question I am asking right now. I'm not above it. But what the AWS outage showed in one afternoon with receipts is that the relationship between us and our stuff has quietly changed shape. When we buy these products, we subscribe to the continued existence of the companies behind them. We rent access to our home from businesses whose core obligation is to their shareholders, not to us, without fully acknowledging the cost of that dependency. The political theorist Ivan Illich wrote decades before any of this about what he called counterproductivity, the point at which a tool built to help you starts taking more from you than it gives. His argument was that past a certain threshold, The institution built to save you time costs you more time than it saves. The thing built to free you ends up binding you tighter. And that's the point I want us to pay attention to. Because all of this is very convenient, but at what cost? The next time you're contemplating buying into something to make your life, quote, easier, ask yourself out loud, what am I actually buying here? Because what you're buying is really just the object. You're buying a relationship with whoever built it. You're buying a dependency on their business model, their security practices, their willingness to keep pushing updates, their continued existence as a company. You're buying a version of your life that works only for as long as their servers do. I can't tell you what that's worth. That's your math to do. Just know that for every smart device you have, in this case, a smart bed, there's a server thousands of miles away deciding whether you get to sleep tonight. And now, the thought of the week. So I'm curious, if two people commit the same harm, what makes one of them survivable and the other not? I've been sitting with that question since the first weekend of April when Ye performed 2 sold-out shows at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles. 70,000 people a night. $33 million total across 2 evenings. The Friday show alone by itself became one of the highest grossing single concerts in live music history. But I don't want to talk about the numbers. I think everybody's talking about the numbers. What I want to talk about is what people were actually showing up for. Because if you watched the footage or if you were there, the first thing you noticed was the stage. A massive illuminated half orb placed at the center of the stadium floor with Ye performing on top of it, while lasers and fireworks and light columns reshaped the entire interior of the venue. The staging itself was more ambitious than anything seen in recent memory. The visual design was more coherent than most art installations. The sound design, the lighting cues, the spatial composition of how bodies moved through the arena, all of it was being directed at a level of detail most musical acts don't even attempt by one of the most relentlessly visual creators of the last 20 years. But that's exactly the point. Ye survives what he survives and comes back from what he comes back from because he is genuinely brilliant at what he does. The man has spent 2 decades building an integrated creative practice that spans music, fashion, architecture, stage design, industrial design, typography, an entire brand ecosystem. And you don't have to like or approve of him, and you don't even have to listen to the music, but you cannot look at what he built on that stage and tell me you're looking at something ordinary. And that, I think, is the conversation bigger than any story of redemption or forgiveness or even ticket sales. Some people who do bad things get canceled, and some people who do bad things don't. And the difference between the two groups, if we are being clear-eyed, is almost never the severity of the harm. A middle manager at, X company USA who said a fraction of the things that Kanye has said over the years would be absolutely canceled and forgotten forever. Same thing with a mid-tier podcaster. Let's say me, for example, if I said something crazy, I would lose any sponsors I had. My entire platform would be obliterated. But a generational creative talent who says the same thing plus more over a period of several years will fill SoFi Stadium for $33 million on a random weekend in April. That, my friends, is a signal of capitalism, not of morality. Here's the pattern. A culture quietly assigns every public figure a sort of creative surplus number. It's the amount of cultural value that a person is currently producing or is expected to keep producing or has produced enough of so far that the audience can't imagine not having access to it. And when something happens that would normally remove that person from public life, that surplus number is quietly weighed against the cost of harm. If the surplus is large enough, the person stays. If it's not, they don't. It's a rule that's very much unwritten. Nobody votes on it. Nobody kind of says it out loud, but it's very much the case. You can watch it in real time every time a scandal breaks, and the internet immediately begins the unofficial, unspoken calculation of how much this person is actually worth to us. And do we want to lose them? The washed up rapper who was never going to make another classic album, canceled. The one whose next album we're still waiting on, heralded. The actor whose career was already on a downslope, dropped by the studio. The one whose movie is opening in 3 weeks gets a written apology and a press tour. That, my friends, is the market, operating on creativity the way that it operates on any other good that some people produce more than others. And the reason that Ye is a perfect test case for this is that his surplus, by any honest measurement, is extraordinary. He's reshaped what hip hop looks like several times over the past 20 years. He's built a fashion line that moved the entire silhouette of streetwear. He's produced records that other producers study as holy grails. A specific silhouette of an oversized sneaker exists because he designed it, or the obsession with skin tone as a color palette, skin tone as a creative direction that has taken over every brand, including some of his ex-wives. He has, in the most literal sense, added things to the culture that otherwise would not exist. And so if you remove him from the culture is measurably smaller. That is simply the truth. And when a culture has to choose between losing something it values and losing the person who made it, the culture historically almost always chooses to keep the thing and renegotiate its relationship to the person. Here's what I want us to hold on to and be very honest about. 70,000 people showing up to SoFi Stadium is not evidence of anything having been made right. It is not a redemption story or some superpower about being uncancelable, because I saw that a lot too. Like, you can't cancel. It has nothing to do with morality. It has nothing to do with the ability to be canceled. And that's the part that matters to me, because the rhetoric online has very much skewed in that direction. Oh my gosh, look how many people came. Look how much money it made. Look, the public decided that Kanye is forgiven. This has nothing to do with forgiveness. The public has decided nothing. The only thing that the public did was demonstrate their demand or their inability to stand on any sense of internal moral compass. Those are two different things. A sold out arena is a data point about what people are willing to pay for. It is not a data point about what the people paying have decided to endorse, forgive, accept, or excuse. But I want to push one step further than that, because this is where the real question lives. The deeper problem isn't that demand and rightness are two different transactions. The deeper problem is why. Why does demand get to run on one track and rightness on another? Why is it possible in 2026 for a person's audience to say in one sentence, what he did was wrong, and in the very next sentence say, but I already bought a ticket? Why did we collectively develop the ability to separate those two facts without experiencing the separation as a contradiction? Because it is very much a contradiction. And it wasn't always this way. There was a period in this country, in very recent memory, where mass demand was understood as a moral instrument. Boycotts moved markets. Where people spent their money was considered a legible expression of what they believed. You could read a community's values based on what it spent its money on. The Montgomery bus boycott did not work because one person took a stand. It worked because an entire town for over a year refused to let their demand run on a different track than their rightness. They fused the two on purpose, and they understood correctly that fusing them was a form of power. Somewhere between now and then, we lost that muscle. Or maybe it was trained out of us. Or maybe even more likely, the sheer speed and volume of consumer life and the hundreds of micro purchases a week that we encounter, or the streaming services, the app downloads, the pre-sales, the impulse buys, the next concert announcement dropping while we're still mid-scroll buying the previous thing. It all got so fast that it stopped leaving room for our values to catch up before the transaction was even complete. And there's a whole industry that grew inside of that gap. The gap between what we believe and what we buy is functionally where modern marketing lives. And that gap is a product of the system, which means that the creative surplus math only works because the gap exists. If demand and rightness still moved as one, as they did in a boycott era, Ye SoFi weekend would have looked a lot different. Any number of other artists' careers would have looked different. The math would produce different outputs because the inputs would be different. We collectively as a society stopped requiring our purchases to reflect our positions. And once we stopped, the market did too. And the market is never going to ask us to go back to doing something that could be risky to them. If we want to happily spend our money, the market will allow us to do so. People will attend a lot of things, but that doesn't make those things right. Even a car crash will slow down traffic for a little while. Spectating says very little about the quality of the show. Which brings me back to the question that I opened with. If two people do the same thing, what makes one of them survivable and the other not? And I think the honest answer, the one that culture seems to have enforced on us but is not saying out loud, the one who has more to give is the one who's allowed to stay. The one who has less to give, gotta go. Which means the rule we are actually operating under is that creativity is kind of a shield. The more a person produces, the more of a protective margin they accumulate against the harms that they may cause. And that cancellation, when it works, almost only works on people who had already stopped producing enough for us to miss them. The people that we think of as, quote, uncancelable are not morally exempt. They are simply net positive enough in what they add to the culture that the math keeps coming out in their favor. I'm not telling you what to do with that, because I don't have a clean answer myself. And I don't think a lot of people, if they're being honest, have a clean answer. But I do think that we should stop pretending that the math isn't real. I want us to stop confusing a sold out arena for a verdict or some sign of redemption. We should be able to say out loud, this person made something I cannot find anywhere else. And this person also did something I cannot defend. And I am choosing actively to keep the first thing without pretending the second one went away. And that's a harder sentence to say than to just blindly celebrate somebody, right? Or to just say, I forgive him. But I do think that this is the most honest one because it names the exchanges we're all quietly making instead of hiding the exchange under some morality play that we aren't actually even holding ourselves to. The stage of SoFi was beautiful. It was also the argument. It was both the spectacle people came to see and the reason he's been able to survive long enough to build it. And that's the thing we're sitting with. Not whether he deserved the night, but what the night tells us about how we collectively have decided to price creativity against harm and whether we're okay with that exchange rate. The question is, what would it take to build a culture where creative surplus, creative value doesn't outweigh the harm that may come with it? I don't know. I'm working on it. And I think that that's the only honest place to work on it from. I want you to do the same. As always, stay curious, stay inspired. All right. Now it's time for Ask Matt. Hey, Matt, have you ever held back an opinion because of how it might be received and why? It's a good one. Short answer, yes, absolutely. All the time, in fact. But here's why. I hold back opinions that are more about me having a reaction than me having a point. I'm a consumer of social media. Like I use social media just like everybody else. I scroll, I see things, and sometimes my first instinct is to have a gut reaction. I'll see things and be like, that was stupid. Or where did that come from? Or why would you do this? Or why would you say that? I have reactions all the time, and they're genuine reactions, but a reaction is not an argument. A reaction isn't something noteworthy to share all the time. A reaction often is a feeling that needs to be shaped into something before it's worth putting in front of everyone, in my humble and personal opinion. And so I tend to sit with things a little longer, and I try to find what's underneath what I'm actually feeling and then see if there's something there worth shaping into something to talk to y'all about. And if not, then I let it go or keep it for the group chat. Also, I hold back on topics where I don't feel informed enough. You know, I think that we're living, and I've spoken about this before, we're living in a world where everyone will get on a mic and get on a camera and just say shit, just talk for the sake of talking. And I tend to not do that. There are whole conversations happening every week where I look at and I say very consciously, I'm not going to participate in that. I don't have anything to meaningfully add to that. And so I stay quiet. There are certain things that are not my lane, and I'm very clear on it. The internet will let you have an opinion about anything, which means you have to decide for yourself what you're going to have opinions on that you actually express. A good example of this was just very recently, if you remember a while back when the Emma Grede conversation happened. And if you weren't tracking it, basically, she shared some opinions about corporate America and women and ambition that set off a pretty polarizing debate online. There were strong takes on both sides. There were people that had, very, very intense things to say in reaction to it. Most of what I saw was anti-Emma. But then I did see a smaller group of people that had started to come to her defense and kind of give their shared perspectives that were aligned with hers. When I was reading it, I did have some thoughts on it. But when I looked at the sheer amount of thoughts that were already being shared, especially by women who were in the circumstances that were the center of the conversation, I didn't feel like I needed to give my take into that. The conversation was happening, it had momentum, and it didn't need me to make it any richer. In fact, I don't really know how I, as a man, would have made it any richer. It felt like a conversation that was very specific for a very specific group of people, particularly in this case, women and majority Black women. And so I was like, let them have it. And that's the thing I'm going to continue to exercise, and I want more of us to exercise as well. It's good to acknowledge the stuff that you don't have to say anything about. So in a world where everyone can weigh in on anything in under 30 seconds, choosing not to is its own form of discipline. Restraint can be a voice as well, depending on what it is, of course. And so I'd rather use my voice on the things that I genuinely feel I have a very strong, knowledgeable thought about, and leave the rest to be. So short answer, yes, I do hold back, but it's mostly around the things that I just don't feel I need to participate in or something that I am not knowledgeable enough to participate in. So there's that. And remember, if you have a question for me, definitely send it over. I love to hear your questions, and I can answer some of them on the show. So shoot me a DM, drop me a comment, or go to CuriousInspired.com/askmatt and submit your question, and then we may answer it on a future episode. Comment of the week. So I do reels on Instagram, and a lot of them get some pretty good traction. There was one reel that I talked about, kind of related to the Kanye story that we just went through, and it was about, my thoughts on why people are so aggressively wanting to attend the concert. And I was presenting an alternate world where, I wanted people to be a little bit more discerning around the things that they participated in. And some of the comments were supportive. Most people tended to agree. Stephen Webster Beauty said my sentiments exactly. So he felt where I was coming from. A friend of mine from undergrad, actually, he basically said along the lines of, if I just ignore the show and continue to work from a stance of principality, it's not going to actually change anything. So basically, I was presenting a world where we could focus more on, quote, the things that matter. And he was saying, even if I don't go to the concert, it's not going to make it so that suddenly all those problems go away. So why can't people simply enjoy themselves? Which I thought was a take that was interesting. And we kind of had some like banter around it, and we had an exchange, and, we ended up kind of meeting in the middle. But I appreciate when people have a contrary point to something that I said, right? Like, I think we're all out here just kind of working through it all. And so, I appreciate when people present counter arguments. Sound, polite, respectful counter arguments, I think, are great. And so shout to Toe for that. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the show. Thank you so much for watching. This was episode 8. Episode 9 and 10 is coming. This is episode 9. Wow, this is episode 9. This is episode 9, y'all. We are almost at 10. At 10, we're going to, it's going to be a little bit of a celebration. I can't believe we're at 10 episodes already. You just finished 9. Stay tuned for 10. Very, very excited. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you all next time. As always, stay curious, stay inspired. Y'all be good. Peace. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And stay tuned for new episodes Thursdays bi-weekly at 8 p.m. Connect more with me at CuriousInspired.com and at CuriousInspired on all socials. Thanks for watching. As always, stay curious, stay inspired. Y'all be good. Peace.